The First World War had ended, but the world it left behind was fragile and uncertain. Nations struggled to recover, economies were in ruins, and millions of people faced fear and hardship every day. In this unstable world, men with vision, ambition, and ruthless determination began to rise, shaping nations and setting the stage for a conflict that would engulf the globe. Welcome to the first part of our series on World War II. In this journey, we'll explore the events that led to the war and the rise of the leaders who shaped it, uncovering the forces that changed the course of history forever. In the first part of our series, we look at the world left behind after World War I, a world full of uncertainty and tension. The guns of World War I had fallen silent, yet the echoes of destruction reverberated across continents. Cities lay in ruins, infrastructure was shattered, and millions of soldiers returned home, many haunted by the horrors they had witnessed on the front lines. Entire empires like the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian had collapsed, leaving fragile nations scrambling to fill political vacuums. In this turbulent environment, ordinary citizens were confronted with fear, desperation, and uncertainty, and it was precisely in this chaos that men of extraordinary ambition began to rise. Charismatic, ruthless, and determined to reshape nations in their own image, these dictators would, in the following 2 decades, plunge the world into its deadliest conflict. Germany bore the heaviest burden of post-war humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crippling reparations and territorial losses, stripping Germany of Alsace-Lorraine colonies and military power. For millions of Germans, this treaty was not merely a political document, it was a daily reminder of national disgrace. Hyperinflation rendered money worthless, wiping out decades of savings almost overnight. Families struggled to afford bread while the fledgling Weimar Republic fought to maintain order in escalating political violence. Extremists on both the left and the right clashed in the streets, leaving a society teetering on the brink, desperate for stability and direction. Amid this turmoil, Adolf Hitler began to emerge. A decorated war veteran and a failed artist, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party in 1919 and quickly rose through its ranks. He promised to restore Germany's honor, overturn the humiliating treaty, and reunite a fractured nation. His speeches resonated deeply with the populace, gripped with anger, fear, and despair. The formation of the Nazi Party, supported by the paramilitary brown shirts, enabled Hitler to silence opposition and enforce obedience. Through massive rallies, marches, and carefully orchestrated propaganda, Hitler transformed himself into a larger-than-life figure, seemingly invincible and destined to lead Germany out of ruin. While Germany wrestled with humiliation and economic despair, Italy faced a different, yet equally volatile scenario. Though victorious in World War I, many Italians felt betrayed by what they called the mutilated victory, as promised territories and rewards were withheld. Economic instability and widespread unemployment fueled social unrest, creating fertile ground for radical leadership. Benito Mussolini, a former socialist and a newspaper editor, seized the moment. In 1919, he founded the National Fascist Party and organized paramilitary black shirts to intimidate opponents and enforce loyalty. Mussolini's rhetoric promised to restore Italy's greatness, bring order to the chaos, and elevate the nation to the glory it once held under the Roman Empire. The dramatic march on Rome in 1922 cemented Mussolini's power. Using the threat of violence, he persuaded King Victor Emmanuel III to hand over authority, establishing Italy's first fascist state. Mussolini relied on spectacle, propaganda, and fear to maintain control. Parades, newspapers, and speeches glorified the state, while opposition was silenced through intimidation or violence. Ordinary Italians, desperate for pride and stability, embraced his vision, demonstrating how charisma, nationalism, and terror could combine to dominate a nation. Across the world, in the Far East, Japan grappled with its own challenges. Rapid Industrialization and modernization had positioned Japan as a rising economic power, yet resource scarcity and pressure from Western nations created internal tension. Nationalists and militarists argued that survival required territorial expansion. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria under the pretext of protecting its interests, establishing a puppet state. The League of Nations condemned the invasion but failed to enforce sanctions which Japan interpreted as tacit approval. This emboldened militarists to dominate the government and pursue aggressive expansion, laying the foundation for Japan's ambitions in the Pacific. Schools, media, and public ceremonies reinforced nationalist fervor, preparing the population to support conquest. By the mid-1930s, authoritarianism was no longer confined to isolated nations. Germany, Italy, Spain, Japan, and even the Soviet Union were ruled by leaders who understood the power of fear, propaganda, and nationalism. Hitler consolidated control in Germany, Mussolini reinforced his hold in Italy, Franco emerged victorious in Spain's civil war, and Stalin tightened his grip on the Soviet Union through purges and terror. Each leader exploited fear, economic despair, and national pride to manipulate the masses, transforming ordinary citizens into instruments of the state. The fragility of democracy and human rights became painfully apparent as power concentrated in the hands of a few. Hitler's ambitions soon extended beyond Germany. In 1936, he remilitarized the Rhineland, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in Anschluss, claiming to unite all German-speaking peoples. Later that year, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, Britain, and France, desperate to avoid another war, pursued appeasement, signing the Munich Agreement to allow the annexation. Yet every concession strengthened Hitler's resolve. The world's fear became a tool he could exploit to expand his power without consequence. Propaganda played a pivotal role in consolidating control. Hitler's speeches, rallies, and radio broadcasts cast him as Germany's savior. Mussolini manipulated media and public spectacle to glorify his regime, while Japanese militarists instilled loyalty to the emperor and nationalist fervor through education and public ceremonies. By controlling the narrative, these leaders shaped public perception, ensured loyalty, and suppressed dissent, creating societies where questioning authority became incredibly dangerous. Economic despair amplified the appeal of authoritarian leaders. The Great Depression of 1929 devastated economies worldwide, increasing unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. In Germany, burdened by reparations, millions were drawn to Hitler's promise of stability, jobs, and national pride. Italy and Japan experienced similar conditions, with radical leaders presenting themselves as the only solution to economic and political chaos. In desperate times, citizens willingly embraced ideologies that offered hope, pride, and a sense of order. Fear and violence reinforced this control. Hitler's brown shirts, Mussolini's black shirts, and Japan's secret police used intimidation, terror, and repression to ensure obedience. Dissidents vanished, opposition parties were banned, and ordinary citizens complied, often out of sheer survival instinct. Coercion and spectacle became inseparable tools of governance, leaving resistance nearly impossible. The international community's response was inadequate. The League of Nations, weakened by limited authority, failed to prevent aggression. Britain and France's policy of appeasement only emboldened dictators. Hesitation and inaction provided opportunities for expansion, demonstrating that weakness could be exploited by those willing to use force. Spain descended into civil war, eventually producing Franco as another authoritarian figure in Europe. Meanwhile, Stalin in the Soviet Union consolidated power through purges, forced labor, and relentless terror, illustrating how fear and coercion could control even vast nations. By 1939, the ambitions of these leaders were unmistakable. Hitler sought European domination, Mussolini pursued imperial expansion in Africa, Japanese militarists conquered territories in Asia, and Stalin solidified his grip at home. Years of instability, propaganda, fear, and economic collapse had primed the world for catastrophe. The rise of dictators between 1919 and 1939 is more than a tale of politics. It is a story of ambition, fear, and consequence. Hitler, Mussolini, and Japanese militarists exploited desperation and nationalism, reshaping nations and rewriting history. This era demonstrates how fragile peace can be when power goes unchecked, how propaganda can manipulate entire populations, and how crises create fertile ground for tyranny. The rise of dictators is not just history, it's a story of ambition, fear, and consequence, a tale of nations and peoples, of courage and terror, of lessons learned and warnings ignored. And like all great histories, it is filled with intrigue, darkness, and the secrets of the past.